When Reno's husband and his mistress screamed, "Get out!" and humiliated her in front of everyone, they had no idea someone powerful was silently watching. That same night, a black car appeared, and the door opened to reveal a man who had loved her in silence for years, the secret president. By morning, her life had changed forever, and those who betrayed her were left trembling. But what they didn't know was that the real reason he came for her was something no one could have imagined. Welcome back to Beyond Color Stories, the place where every tale is bigger than life, every hero rises against the odds, and every story will leave you breathless. Before we dive in, I want to know, where are you listening from today? Drop it in the comments. Get ready, because today we're diving into a journey of power, passion, and unstoppable love that will grip your heart from the very first moment. Let's begin. Reno froze mid-step as Celine's finger jabbed mercilessly into her chest, the force of it punctuated by the sharp, venomous scream that tore through the restaurant. "Get out!" The words ricocheted off the polished walls, clinking in the ears of every patron, slicing the warm, ambient chatter into jagged silence. Reno's mind flickered for a moment, disbelief threatening to overpower her, yet she stayed rooted, the heat of humiliation crawling up her spine around her. The world seemed to pause, eyes darting between the accusation in Celine's shrill tone and the man who should have stood by her. But Daryl, her husband, lounged back in his chair, like a predator surveying his prey, amusement curling around his lips as though her misery was the performance he had meticulously directed for weeks. His laughter struck Reno sharper than any words could, a mock symphony orchestrated to belittle her existence. Her chest tightened, not with surrender, but with the simmering awareness that she had survived worse and would survive this too. The murmurs around her were like tiny knives, each whisper a calculated insult aimed at cutting the dignity she had spent a lifetime cultivating. She could feel them, sense the judgment, the quiet assumption that she would crumble under the weight of public scorn. But Reno's chin rose imperceptibly, a defiance blooming quietly in her eyes. The world might wait for black women to falter, but she had never been one to oblige it. Even now, in the epicenter of public humiliation, there was a fire in her that refused to dim Celine's words. Vicious and sharp, came at her in waves, mocking the cut of her dress, the hue of her skin, the life she had painstakingly built beside a man who had never truly seen her worth. The cruelty was layered and refined, but Reno's stillness transformed it. Each insult that tried to carve her down only polished the steel hidden in her calm, a glint that caught the eye of anyone paying attention, anyone who truly saw beyond the surface. Daryl's applause echoed in her ears as she pivoted toward the exit, a mockery that should have shattered her, but instead sparked a clarity she hadn't felt in years. That single sarcastic clap was the final nail sealing the coffin of her illusions, confirming that the man she had married was not just unworthy, but actively hostile to her existence. The heat of anger mingled with the cool night air as she stepped outside, the darkness embracing her with more tenderness than Daryl ever had. The night whispered promises of release as the air brushed her skin, carrying away fragments of humiliation, even before she fully acknowledged the depth of the betrayal. She let herself inhale it deeply, letting the ocean of relief rise quietly in her chest, and for a fleeting moment, almost faltered. Almost, but not quite. Her phone vibrated insistently in her clutch, a tremor of hope in a night saturated with venom. Seeing the name Kyle Montclair flash on the screen was like lightning striking a stormy sea inside her, fear, longing, and a shiver of something dangerous and thrilling all at once. His presence in her life had always been an enigma, a force felt but never fully understood, a man whose power and restraint had shadowed her existence without ever imposing upon it. The sound of his voice, when it flowed through the phone, was both velvet and steel, smooth but unyielding, a paradox she had learned to trust implicitly. "Reno, did they finally reveal what they are?" he asked, the weight behind the question grounding her like the hand of a tethered anchor, pulling her from chaos. Her breath caught, a tremor running through her body as words refused to come freely. Her whisper, "Yes," barely escaped her lips, but it was enough. A confession and a release all at once, breaking the silence she had carried for years within her chest. Kyle exhaled slowly on the other end, the sound more dangerous than any threat, layered with a controlled intensity that made her heart stutter. She could feel the storm of his presence in the quiet pause that followed. A space filled with the certainty of action, the kind of decisive will that did not tolerate hesitation. And then he spoke again, the words dropping like hammers. "Pack your things. You rise tonight." Each syllable carried a gravity that pressed against her ribs, a promise and a command entwined with something personal, something protective. The world she had inhabited, filled with shame, ridicule, and a man who had chosen cruelty over love, suddenly felt small, fragile, irrelevant in the shadow of what was about to come. Her hands shook slightly as she turned away from the restaurant, the echoes of laughter and mockery fading into the distance. She moved toward her car, each step measured, deliberate, like the slow but unstoppable march of someone reclaiming power that had always been hers. The streets around her seemed both familiar and strange, lit by streetlights that flickered, in rhythm with her heartbeat. Every step was a negotiation with herself, a quiet promise that she would no longer be the victim of anyone's spectacle, that her life would no longer serve as entertainment for the selfish. Her mind raced, but stayed tethered to Cale's voice, the urgency of his words carving a tunnel of clarity through the chaos of her thoughts. She was no longer just Reno, the wife humiliated in public. She was Reno, the woman ready to reclaim, to rise, to step into a world that had been waiting quietly for her arrival. The interior of her car felt different that night, a liminal space between the life she was leaving and the one that beckoned. She placed her phone on the passenger seat, her fingers brushing it as though seeking further guidance. A talisman from the man who had silently watched over her, who had known her worth long before she dared to believe it herself. The cool hum of the engine, the faint scent of leather, the soft light spilling from the dashboard, all contrasted violently with the fire of her emotions. Anger, grief, relief, and anticipation warred within her, yet none broke her focus. She was walking the edge of transformation, the precipice of a night that would reshape every expectation she had clung to. Every glance at the rearview mirror reminded her of what she was leaving behind. Daryl's smug face, the cruelty etched into Celine's laugh, the small crowd of indifferent onlookers who had merely observed without empathy. The world she was stepping out of had thrived on diminishment and shame, but the world Kyle offered whispered of recognition, protection, and something infinitely more dangerous than comfort. Freedom. She inhaled sharply, letting the cool night air fill her lungs, steadying the tremor that threatened to betray her composure. As she reached her apartment, she paused briefly, her fingers brushing the doorknob, the sound of the city at night, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog, each reminded her of the life she had once known and the chains she had carried quietly. But tonight, every small sound felt like a marker of transition, every shadow a witness to her decision. She had spent years being small, being careful, being polite in the face of cruelty. Tonight, she would step into something unrecognizable, something larger than the narrow confines of humiliation. Her suitcase, small but carefully packed with what truly belonged to her, rested in the corner. Each item she placed inside carried intention, clothing she loved, letters she had written in secret, keepsakes of a self that Daryl never truly saw. She paused over a photograph, a quiet smile tugging at her lips despite the tears that threatened to spill. Memories were not chains, she reminded herself. They were reminders of how far she had come. The sound of her phone buzzing again, Kyle's name flashing insistently, pulled her from the reverie. She answered on the first ring, her voice steady, though her pulse raced. "I'm ready." His approval was silent, but palpable through the line, a steady anchor amidst the storm of emotions crashing over her. The instruction was simple but absolute. Leave. Step into the night. Trust. She nodded almost unconsciously to the empty room, as though the walls themselves could understand her choice. Stepping into the elevator, she felt the weight of years pressing against her spine, the anticipation of unknown battles and unseen victories mingling in her chest. Each floor ticked by like a countdown, each ding a pulse that measured her courage. By the time she reached the ground floor, she was a woman transformed in ways that were invisible yet unmistakable. The lobby, usually a neutral space, now felt charged, electric with the tension of the moment, as though the world itself held its breath to watch her step into her destiny. The city street beyond the doors was cool and almost surreal in its stillness. The glow of streetlights painted her in halos of gold and silver, and the quiet hum of distant life created a soundtrack to her defiance. And then, in the shadowed driveway, a sleek black car waited, its presence announcing authority and inevitability. An omen of the life awaiting her, Kyle's presence behind the wheel was silent but commanding, a figure whose reputation whispered across corridors she had never dared to enter. The door opened with deliberate patience, inviting but not coercing the woman who had finally found her voice. She stepped forward, suitcase in hand, every motion measured, defiant, and trembling with contained excitement. The night seemed to lean closer, to witness, to applaud, to brace itself for the transformation unfolding in silence. When she closed the car door behind her, the world she had known, the humiliations, the betrayals, the small cruelties, dropped away with a soft thud, leaving only the possibility of power, of love, of reclamation. The engine purred softly, a prelude to the journey. Ahead, and Cale's eyes met hers, sharp, protective, and filled with something she had thought she would never deserve. And then, as the city lights blurred behind them, the first whisper of a new life tickled the edges of her mind, a secret promise hanging in the night. Nothing would ever be the same again. The black car's door closed behind Reno with a subtle thud, but inside the air seemed to vibrate with possibility, charged with the electricity of a life she had only glimpsed in her dreams and whispered hopes. Yet before that freedom could fully settle, she had to traverse the familiar yet poisoned corridors of a place she had once called home, the house where laughter had once mingled with hope and now reeked of betrayal. Her heels clicked against the polished hardwood floors as she stepped through the doorway, each sound deliberate, echoing like the quiet proclamation of a woman reclaiming herself. In the living room, her gaze fell on Darryl, lounging with the arrogance of a man who believed he owned not just her life, but her soul. Celine was curled beside him, laughing, a cruel, tinkling melody of mockery that had haunted her for years. The sight would have broken anyone else, but Reno felt only a wave of calm power wash over her, the kind that comes when one realizes that fear no longer holds dominion. Her movements were steady, almost slow, each step measuring her authority over a space that had been tainted by his entitlement. Darryl called after her, his voice laced with venom and false bravado. "No man will ever want you once I'm done exposing the truth." The words were meant to wound, to elicit a reaction that would feed his ego, but Reno's expression remained neutral, her gaze cool and unwavering. Celine giggled, a sound designed to sting, a melody of malice that had been rehearsed over countless moments of imagined triumph. But Reno, unmoved, felt the power shift imperceptibly, an invisible tide rolling beneath the veneer of domestic normalcy. She passed them both, the air around her thick with tension, her silent composure, a puzzle that unsettled even the walls. Each tap of her heels against the floor resonated like a drum beat, counting down the moments until the life she was leaving would crumble behind her forever. The bedroom door loomed ahead, a portal to memories layered with both tenderness and betrayal. Rieno paused briefly, letting her fingers graze the frame, remembering the nights she had dreamed of safety here, the laughter she had once shared, and the promises that had evaporated under Daryl's cruelty. Inside, she found her suitcase waiting, small and unassuming, yet it held the weight of years, the pieces of herself she still recognized as sacred, untouched by lies or manipulation. She moved with precision, collecting only what truly belonged to her. The letters she had written in secret, the jewelry she had cherished silently, the photographs that spoke of who she was rather than what Daryl wanted her to be. Each item placed carefully inside the suitcase was a reclaiming, a declaration that she would not leave behind fragments of her identity for anyone to discard. Thunder rolled in the distance, the sound vibrating through the walls in sync with the storm rising within her chest. But this storm was not one of sadness. It was clarity, a sudden, sharp realization of the life she had endured and the life she was choosing now. Every rumble of thunder punctuated her resolve, echoing the heartbeat of a woman stepping decisively into power. She could feel the tension coiling inside the house, the residual energy of Daryl and Celine's cruelty pressing against her back like invisible hands. Yet she did not falter. The past would not chase her tonight. Her phone buzzed sharply, and Reno's pulse quickened at the message from Kyle. "I'm outside." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a world she had only just begun to understand. A world where someone saw her, truly, and valued her beyond every humiliation she had endured. With a single measured breath, she zipped the suitcase closed, the sound like a ceremonial seal, locking away not just her belongings, but the chapter she had lived in under Daryl's shadow. It was a quiet act, yet it thundered louder than any insult ever hurled at her. The finality settled in her chest, a cool, liberating sensation that whispered, "This is yours, this is real, and this time you are untouchable." As she stepped back into the living room, the change in her demeanor became unmistakable. The smirk that had danced on Daryl's lips faltered, a twitch of disbelief betraying the careful mask he had maintained for so long. He expected tears, pleading, a display of weakness he could savor and broadcast. Instead, Reno's eyes were calm, her posture erect, and her silence screamed louder than any accusation she could have hurled. Nothing terrifies a guilty man more than the quiet strength of someone he once thought powerless. And in that moment, she held the power not just over herself, but over the illusions he had spent years building. Daryl opened his mouth again, perhaps to provoke, perhaps to reclaim a semblance of control, but no words would escape Reno's lips. She was done negotiating with cruelty. The air outside beckoned with the perfume of freedom, carrying hints of the night, damp earth, distant traffic, and the faint intoxicating scent of possibilities. Reno's hand hesitated briefly on the doorknob, a ritual pause that acknowledged the life she was leaving behind. One last glance at Daryl and Celine would have been expected, but she refused to grant them the satisfaction. Instead, she moved forward, every step deliberate, every motion an act of quiet defiance. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel to destiny, each footfall echoing like a drumbeat of liberation. Her ears caught the soft click of her heels, a rhythm marking her autonomy, a metronome counting down the seconds to her emancipation. The sleek black car outside waited, its tinted windows reflecting the dim glow of streetlights, a silent promise of the night ahead. The vehicle exuded authority, a presence both intimidating and protective, hinting at a life far removed from the small cruelties and petty power struggles she had left behind. The engine purred lightly, a restrained growl that seemed to acknowledge her as someone worthy, someone who deserved more than the world had allowed her to believe. Her suitcase swung lightly in her hand, the sound almost ceremonial, a herald to the transformation that was already underway. As she opened the door, the night air enveloped her, brushing across her skin with the gentleness of a life waiting to be claimed. And then she saw him, Kyle Montclair, seated calmly behind the wheel, his eyes scanning her with a precision that both comforted and unnerved her. Every line of his jaw, every glint in his eyes, spoke of a man who carried both power and patience, someone who had waited not for the perfect moment, but for the moment when she was ready. Her past life, the humiliation, the betrayal, the years of silent suffering crumbled behind her in a quiet, final thud, leaving space for something larger, something almost unimaginable, to take its place. The world beyond the doors seemed to shrink, irrelevant in the presence of what was to come. Kyle's hand extended subtly, a silent invitation, and for the first time in years, Reno felt a pulse of anticipation untainted by fear. Every instinct screamed to step forward, to leave behind the suffocating weight of past pain, to embrace the unknown with both courage and desire. The city noises faded, the whispers of doubt vanished, replaced by the quiet electricity of destiny. Each heartbeat matched the soft hum of the car, a prelude to a life she had only dared to dream about, a night that promised transformation. The click of the seatbelt, the soft press of leather against her back, the faint scent of Kyle's cologne mingling with the night air, all were small markers of the journey beginning. The engine's low rumble was a rhythm of change, a sound that matched the rising anticipation in her chest. And as the black car pulled away from the driveway, leaving the lights of her old life flickering behind, a single unspoken truth settled firmly within her. Nothing would ever be the same again. Tonight, she would step into her power, her freedom, and the life she had been waiting for. Because Reno Montclair had finally chosen herself. 3. The car door clicked shut behind her, a sound that seemed to slice away the world she had just left behind, leaving only the soft hum of the engine and the palpable tension inside the cabin. The city lights outside blurred into streaks of gold and silver, but they could not touch the intensity of the moment, nor the weight of the gaze that held her still and careful. Kyle Montclair, his eyes, sharp and unreadable, studied her in silence, absorbing everything the world had tried to hide in plain sight. The trembling restraint in her hands, the subtle lift of her chin, the faint pulse that betrayed the fire beneath her calm. He reached for her hand, not with desperation, not with need, but with a grounded, commanding assurance that reverberated through her chest. The warmth of his touch settled over her trembling fingers, solidifying a truth she had longed for but never dared to name. She was not alone, and she never would be again unless she chose it. Kyle's presence filled the space between them, immense yet controlled, a power that required no announcement, no posturing, no display. Each line of his jaw, each subtle shift of his body, carried authority, honed not by wealth alone, but by a life lived with precision and purpose. He did not need the city to bow. The city seemed to bend itself toward him naturally, as if recognizing the gravity he carried with effortless certainty. "You should have called me sooner," he said, his voice a low vibration that resonated in the hollow of her chest, steadying her racing heartbeat, forcing her to confront the fact that he had always been there, even when she feared him, even when she resented his absence. Her lips parted slightly, and she swallowed, the fear of his magnitude, the sheer scale of his world, and the intensity of his love, pressing against her throat in a sudden, almost suffocating weight. She whispered haltingly, "You disappeared." The words were soft, hesitant, as if speaking them aloud might shatter the fragile courage that had brought her to this point. Kyle's jaw tightened, his hand over hers, never faltering, never letting her sense doubt in the strength he offered. "I only stepped back," he admitted, his voice rich and measured, Because you insisted you needed to try life without me, I obeyed. I stayed away because you demanded it, but never because I wanted to. Each syllable was layered with the gravity of a man who had loved quietly but completely, who had waited for her growth without attempting to control it. The confession hung in the air like a whispered thunderclap, revealing a depth of patience and devotion she had not dared to imagine. The hum of the engine shifted as Kyle maneuvered the sleek black vehicle away from the city streets, heading toward avenues that twisted and led her further away from the life she had been shackled to. Her mind raced, tracing the familiar yet strange paths of her transformation, each heartbeat a drumbeat in the symphony of a night that promised rebirth. The buildings slipped past, mere shadows and light now, while the horizon stretched endlessly in front of her, waiting for the story she was about to step into. As the car pulled onto a secluded road, illuminated only by the moonlight and occasional street lamps, the landscape began to change. The first hints of controlled wilderness, gated estates, and perfectly manicured hedges, the city's chaos, with its eyes and whispers and judgments, felt like a distant memory. With each passing mile, Reno felt the layers of her old life peeling away, leaving her raw yet invincible. Her heart beat faster at the realization that Cale had orchestrated this escape meticulously. This was not haphazard, not spur of the moment, but a deliberate, calculated reclamation of her life. Soon, the road opened to a sprawling private airstrip, its tarmac gleaming under the cold silver of midnight lights. Men in dark suits and earpieces straightened instinctively as Cale's car approached, their posture rigid with respect and awareness, not just for Cale, but now, it seemed, for her as well. Reno's eyes widened subtly. The reality of this world, a world she had only glimpsed in passing stories of wealth and influence, crashing into her mind. The air was heavy with the scent of jet fuel and night-blooming flora, a strangely intoxicating mix that sent shivers down her spine. She remained seated, her fingers gripping the edge of the leather seat as anticipation and awe mingled with the lingering remnants of fear. Cale killed the engine, and silence fell. He slid the door open for her with a subtle gesture, the quietness of it belying the force of intention behind the act. Reno stepped out cautiously, her heels clicking against the tarmac, each sound absorbed by the vast openness of the airstrip. The men in suits, who had been statuesque until now, gave her the smallest nods, acknowledging her presence with a deference that both startled and intrigued her. She could feel the weight of unseen eyes on her, workers, guards, assistants, all recognizing not just Cale's authority, but the quiet authority that now radiated from her. Her suitcase, small but purposeful, waited at Cale's side. He bent to lift it himself, refusing any assistance, his actions both protective and symbolic. Each step he took toward the jet was deliberate, commanding yet unhurried, as if marking a path away from the past she had known and toward a future she had yet to define. Reno followed, the sound of her breath mingling with the night wind, the scent of her own perfume blending with the sharp tang of anticipation in the air. The private jet, gleaming under the moonlight, loomed ahead, a vessel of escape and transformation, a metallic promise of power and freedom she had never dared to imagine. As they approached the stairs to the aircraft, Reno felt a quiet tremor of vulnerability, a flicker of hesitation she had not expected. She looked up at Cale, searching for the reassurance that had become her anchor since he had re-entered her life. The intensity of his gaze, softened by an unmistakable tenderness, met hers. And in that instant, her vulnerability became strength, a readiness to embrace the unknown with courage. She asked quietly, almost reverently, Where are we going?" Her voice carried more than curiosity. It carried the weight of every fear, every betrayal, every longing she had experienced, condensed into a single question. Kyle's answer was simple, yet layered with immeasurable weight, each word a promise that resonated deep within her chest. Home, the home you were always meant to claim. The words settled like a declaration, a marker that this was not just a journey to a place, but a journey into the life she had been denied, the life she had always deserved. And as he reached for her hand again, guiding her up the stairs, the night seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with the weight of transformation and anticipation, whispering that nothing would ever be the same once she stepped inside the aircraft and into the life that awaited her. The engines of the private jet purred quietly as they boarded. The interior bathed in soft light that seemed to caress her skin, warming the nervous tremor in her hands. The luxurious leather seats, polished surfaces, and subtle hum of technology were a stark contrast to the life she had left behind, a silent testament to the magnitude of the world Kyle inhabited, and now she would inhabit with him. Each step she took into the cabin felt like leaving another fragment of the past behind, shedding the weight of shame, betrayal, and subservience. Replacing it with the thrilling and terrifying freedom of sovereignty, Kyle moved beside her as she settled into a seat, his presence a shield and a reminder of the promise he had whispered. The hum of the engines under the floorboards became a heartbeat, synchronized with hers as the jet began its slow taxi toward the runway. She felt the weight of anticipation pressing against her chest, a mixture of awe, fear, and exhilaration. The moment was suspended in time, hanging between what had been and what was about to become, and every breath she took was a measured, deliberate step into her reclamation. The runway stretched ahead, illuminated by the faint glow of runway lights, vanishing into the distance like a ribbon of endless possibility. Reno's eyes traced the path, and she realized with a sudden, breathtaking clarity that she had never truly been free until this moment. Her past, with all its cruelty, all its humiliation, had been left behind, folded neatly into the suitcase she had carried, while the future spread out before her like an ocean waiting to be claimed. And as Kale reached for the controls, guiding the aircraft into the night sky, Reno felt the first surge of exhilaration, a rush of uncontainable power that whispered, "This is just the beginning." 4. The engines of the private jet hummed quietly beneath her, a constant low vibration that seemed to synchronize with the rapid beats of Reno's heart. The cabin was bathed in soft morning light, filtering through the wide windows, streaks of gold painting patterns across the polished leather seats, glinting faintly on the steel accents, and turning the interior into a sanctuary suspended in air. She stared out the window, her eyes drinking in the endless expanse of ocean stretching to the horizon, its waves a hypnotic dance of sapphire and silver that seemed to shimmer with the promise of freedom. Each crest of water reflected the rising sun, sparkling like jewels scattered by the universe itself, and Reno felt something deep within her chest twist, a cocktail of disbelief, awe, and a tentative hope she had not allowed herself in years. Kyle sat beside her, calm and commanding, his gaze occasionally flicking toward her with a softness that unsettled and grounded her simultaneously. There was no need for words. The quiet shared between them carried its own language, a silent acknowledgement of the night behind them and the dawn before them. She reached out subtly, brushing her fingers against the edge of the seat, as though grounding herself in the reality of this moment, trying to convince herself that this was not a dream spun from desperation and wishful thinking. Her suitcase, small and dignified, rested at her feet. Yet it no longer represented escape. It symbolized the journey she had already undertaken, the courage she had summoned to claim this new beginning. The jet began its descent, and Reno's pulse quickened. Below, the water deepened in color, shifting from bright turquoise near the shore to the mysterious, almost mystical navy that hugged the edges of the island. It was a view that demanded reverence. The untouched clarity of the ocean below mirrored the clarity forming in her mind. Her eyes caught the outlines of a sprawling property rising majestically from the cliffs, white walls and glass facades sparkling in the morning sun like a crown hewn from marble and light. It was impossible to mistake it for anything less than monumental. a palace perched between heaven and sea, the kind of home that existed in fantasies and dreams. She swallowed hard, her breath catching as awe and disbelief collided in her chest. The jet touched down gently on a runway, embedded seamlessly into the cliffs, the tires hissing softly as the plane slowed, the sound mingling with the ocean's roar below. Rieno's hand pressed lightly against the armrest, grounding herself as anticipation coiled in her stomach. Outside, men in crisp uniforms moved with fluid precision, opening the jet door to a light breeze that smelled faintly of salt and freedom. The sun had risen further now, spilling golden light across the island, painting everything in warm hues, illuminating not only the land, but the sudden, immense possibilities of the life awaiting her. Kyle slid his hand into hers again, his grip firm and grounding. "Ready?" he asked, a low rumble beneath the calmness of his voice. Rieno nodded, feeling the electricity of his presence ripple through her like a current. The first step onto the tarmac was breathtaking. The air was cooler than she expected, scented with salt and the faint perfume of the flora that hugged the cliffs. Waves crashed below with relentless rhythm, a symphony composed by nature itself, and she couldn't help but think that even the ocean seemed to celebrate her arrival. The mansion came into full view as they approached, rising from the cliffs like a throne carved directly from the earth, an architectural testament to power and vision. Its walls of glass reflected the sunlight, creating flashes that danced across the surrounding landscape, and Rieno felt as though she had stepped into a dream built not for anyone else, but for her. The structure itself seemed alive, commanding, yet welcoming in a way that disarmed her cautious heart. Steps of marble led from the landing to the grand entrance, each one gleaming under the sun, polished so perfectly that the reflection of the sky above shimmered across the surface. As they drew nearer, the mansion's staff emerged, aligned in perfect formation along the staircase. They bowed deeply, not toward Kale, but toward Rieno, an acknowledgement that struck her with the force of a revelation. For the first time in years, she was being recognized as someone deserving of respect, someone powerful simply for being herself. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she forgot how to speak, caught between disbelief and the rising tide of pride swelling inside her. Each step she took toward the mansion felt ceremonial, each movement a declaration that she was entering not just a place, but a new reality where she was seen, valued, and celebrated. The ocean roared behind her, waves smashing against the cliffs with a cadence that seemed orchestrated in honor of her arrival. Rieno turned her head, letting the spray of salt-laden wind brush across her face, and the sound enveloped her as though nature itself was applauding the end of her captivity and the beginning of her sovereignty. The wind tugged lightly at her hair, teasing strands loose and curling them around her shoulders, yet she welcomed it as a cleansing force, brushing away years of humiliation and neglect. She felt light, almost weightless, as though the gravity of her old life had lifted from her shoulders entirely. Kale's voice, low and warm, broke the reverie. "It's yours," he said, simple words that reverberated with such certainty and intention that they seemed to shake the ground beneath her. Her eyes met his, wide and uncomprehending, searching for any hint that he might be speaking figuratively, yet his expression was unwavering, filled with an intensity that made her knees feel momentarily unsteady. "Yours," she whispered, disbelief threading through her voice. "All of this for me?" He nodded, a faint, enigmatic smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "For you. I've waited years for the moment you were ready to see it. Every corner of this island, every stone, every light, every shadow, it was always designed to welcome you." The sheer magnitude of his words threatened to overwhelm her, yet the warmth in his eyes offered reassurance, anchoring her to the reality of his intention. Together they ascended the marble staircase, her steps slow, deliberate, each one a peeling away of old scars, doubts, and fear. The mansion loomed larger with each rise, not oppressive but inspiring, every architectural line and glass panel reflecting her transformation as much as it reflected the sunlight. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast refracted light across polished floors, illuminating rooms designed like living art, walls adorned with paintings and sculptures curated not for display, but for resonance, for emotional impact, as though the house itself had been instructed to honor her arrival. She reached out to touch a railing of glass, the cold smoothness shocking her skin, and a rush of clarity washed over her. Each breath felt like an exhale of the past, each inhalation a claim to her future. The ocean breeze flowed in through open walls, carrying the scent of salt and freedom, lifting the weight of the woman Darrell had tried to break. Every wave that crashed against the cliffs below seemed to whisper a promise. This is your domain now, and no one can take it from you. Kyle stepped close, his presence brushing her shoulder, grounding her without words. His voice, low and intimate, carried a promise that made her skin tingle. Tomorrow, the world will learn who you are, and who stands at your side. The words lingered, hanging between them like a vow and a warning, and Reno felt the surge of power and anticipation bloom within her chest. She had stepped into the sun, into her future, into the life she had been denied, and nothing, no cruelty, no betrayal, would ever diminish the force she had become. The first warmth of morning seeped into the mansion, spilling across polished floors and through glass walls, painting golden streaks over the vast expanse of furniture, artwork, and open space. Yet Reno's gaze was fixed on the horizon. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the cliffs, each wave catching the sun and turning it into a shimmering mirror that reflected the vastness of possibility before her. For the first time in years, the sound of water slapping against rocks did not sting or remind her of pain. It resonated like a melody written for renewal, rewriting her story one note at a time. She stepped out onto the balcony, bare feet brushing against cool marble tiles, and felt the breeze dance across her skin, tousling her hair and carrying the scent of salt and the faint fragrance of exotic flowers planted strategically along the cliffs below. Every element seemed orchestrated to welcome her, to herald her rise. Kyle appeared beside her silently, as if materializing from the morning light itself, holding a cup of tea with delicate precision. The simplicity of the gesture struck her. Here was a man whose name alone carried empires, who could command the world with a single call, yet he chose to offer her warmth, patience, and a simple cup as though tending to a rare, precious flower. Reno blinked, unsure whether to be stunned by the luxury surrounding her or by the depth of his attentiveness. She took the cup hesitantly, the porcelain cool against her fingers, and inhaled the fragrant steam rising from it. Why give this to me?" she asked softly, her voice almost lost beneath the whispering waves, as if afraid the enormity of the question might shatter the fragile calm around her. Kyle's eyes softened, the sharp intensity that had dominated every night they had spent together, now tempered with a rare vulnerability. "I've been building it for years," he said, voice low but deliberate. "Long before you even married Darrell. Every wall, every room, every detail was for you, waiting for the moment you were ready to claim it." His words wrapped around her like silk and steel at once, gentle, yet laden with a force she could not ignore. Reno felt something inside her shift, a stirring deep in her chest that had been dormant, buried under layers of doubt, betrayal, and long years of submission. It was a slow, creeping realization that Kyle hadn't just returned into her life. He had been there all along, preparing a space where she could rise without constraint, without judgment, without compromise. The staff moved around them, invisible yet omnipresent, each one performing their duties with a reverence that went beyond mere protocol. Reno noticed that they did not follow Kale's instructions blindly. Instead, they seemed to respond to her presence with a natural respect, as if the mansion itself recognized her as the center of its gravity. The chef peeked around a doorway, smiling respectfully and asking if she had any dietary preferences, noting carefully that these decisions were hers alone, not Kale's. The security team bowed subtly as she passed, a quiet acknowledgement that she now commanded not only protection but influence, that her authority within these walls was absolute. Every gesture, every glance, every nod told her that this was her world now, and she had been born to inhabit it fully. Reno moved through the grand hallway, each step deliberate, her heels echoing faintly against the polished marble. Her hand brushed against a space on the wall clearly reserved for a future portrait, a photograph that would bear her image, her identity, her reclamation of life. Her throat tightened, and her chest felt both heavy and buoyant at once, as if every suppressed emotion of the past years had decided to rise simultaneously. She turned slightly, her breath catching as Kale stepped behind her, his presence a grounding force that reminded her she no longer had to face the world alone. "You're not here to hide from a failed marriage," he murmured, his voice low, intimate, vibrating against her spine. "You're here to rise into the life you were born to own." Each word struck her with the force of truth, unraveling doubts she had carried for years, revealing the unspoken possibility that she had never truly been powerless. She had only lacked the stage that matched her magnitude. Reno's fingers clenched lightly against the railing, her knuckles white as she absorbed the weight of his declaration, and for a fleeting moment she allowed herself to imagine the life she could now craft. One free from humiliation, free from betrayal, free from the constraints of a man who never deserved her. Before she could respond, Kale's phone buzzed sharply, slicing through the serenity like a knife. He glanced at the screen, and the warmth of his expression dimmed into a sudden, unreadable shadow. Reno followed his gaze, noting the tension that tightened his jaw and flickered across his eyes. The calm of the island seemed to stiffen, as if it too sensed the approaching storm. "Reno, someone is coming for you," he whispered, the words carrying a weight that made her pulse jump, a tension she had not expected this morning of triumph. Her mind raced. Who could possibly threaten this sanctuary, this world Kale had built for her? She thought of Darryl and the venom he had unleashed on her life, but a part of her had believed he had reached the end of his reach. Yet Kyle's gravity, the absolute certainty in his warning, made her understand instantly. This was no ordinary intrusion. This was calculated, deliberate, meant to test her newfound rise. Her heartbeat quickened, echoing in her ears as the wind from the ocean teased loose strands of her hair and carried a whisper of the approaching danger. Kale's hands found hers, steadying, grounding, even as his eyes scanned the horizon beyond the balcony, taking in every movement on the cliffside, every ripple across the waves. Reno felt a surge of power in that moment, a realization that her fear did not have to define her. She could confront this threat while standing fully in her own authority. The staff around them shifted subtly, a quiet readiness in their posture, signaling that the mansion was not just a home, but a fortress. And she, its sovereign. She turned slowly, her gaze sweeping across the cliffs, the ocean, the perfectly manicured island grounds, and the sleek paths leading from the boat docks. The early sunlight glinted off something in the distance, a faint shimmer that could have been a wave or an approaching vessel. Reno's pulse quickened, the hair on her arms rising as instinct and anticipation coiled inside her like a spring ready to release. Her lips parted slightly, and she realized with sudden clarity that this was the test she had unconsciously been preparing for all her life. The moment to prove, not just to the world, but to herself, that she could face threat without fear, claim power without hesitation, and rise fully, unflinching. Kyle leaned close, his voice a whisper against the wind, yet layered with authority that made her spine stiffen with readiness. "No one steps foot here without my permission," he said, "and anyone who tries will answer to you as well." The weight of the words was immediate, tangible, a prelude to the storm that was approaching. Reno's mind raced with possibilities, each more dangerous and thrilling than the last, yet beneath it all, a core of exhilaration spread through her veins. She was no longer the woman who trembled in a restaurant, no longer the wife who cried behind closed doors. She was a force awakened, and the world would soon have to recognize it. The wind tugged at her dress as she stepped back from the railing, her chest lifting with renewed determination. The ocean's roar seemed to swell in agreement, a living chorus affirming her rise. Kyle's hand brushed hers once more, a silent pledge that she would not face this storm alone, but with him as both anchor and ally. Reno inhaled sharply, her gaze narrowing toward the horizon, her senses alert to every movement, every shadow, every potential sign of intrusion. A thrill ran through her, a shiver of anticipation, as the first hint of approaching figures emerged far across the water, their shapes faint but unmistakable against the glinting waves. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The mansion, the island, the ocean, all of it, the stage was set. The moment of reckoning was coming, and Reno Montclair would meet it not as a victim, but as the woman the world had never seen coming. 6. The hum of the mansion systems shifted subtly as Kyle ended his call, the air thickening with urgency that pressed against Reno's chest like a living thing. The calm morning she had begun to embrace shattered instantly, replaced by a pulse of controlled chaos that threaded through the walls, the corridors, the very foundation of the island. Reno's stomach knotted sharply, a reflexive reminder that danger was never polite and never waited for her to be comfortable. Kyle's hands had been warm moments ago, grounding her in serenity, but now they were steel, holding hers with a grip that signaled both protection and a warning. "Daryl's pulled something," he said, voice low, almost clipped, a tone she had only ever heard when stakes were life-altering and non-negotiable. Her chest tightened as he revealed the horrifying news. Her ex-husband had filed a false missing person report, spinning lies to law enforcement, claiming she had vanished under mysterious circumstances, suggesting abduction to frame her escape as perilous. Reno's heart thumped sharply, a frantic rhythm that threatened to betray the composed exterior she had spent years cultivating. Yet even as fear tried to worm its way into her consciousness, she felt a fire flicker deep inside, igniting from the core of all the injustices she had endured. She straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin, refusing to let the deceit define her or shake the armor she had built over countless nights of silent endurance. Kyle's gaze locked with hers, steel meeting defiance, and in that moment Reno understood he wasn't just informing her, he was offering a choice, a statement. She could succumb, or she could rise. The staff, trained for precision, moved swiftly around the mansion, their coordinated movements an unspoken symphony of loyalty and readiness. Guards checked and rechecked perimeters, electronic systems hummed and buzzed with heightened alert. And Reno noticed subtle changes in the lighting and surveillance feeds, signaling that the mansion was preparing to transform from sanctuary to fortress. Guided by a calm authority, Kyle led her to the mansion's security suite, a room awash with screens displaying every corner of the island, the docks, the cliffs, and the coastline. The room smelled faintly of polished metal and electronics, a scent that suggested both preparation and vigilance. Reno stood before the largest screen, her reflection mingling with the waves on the display, the vast horizon now fractured by approaching vessels. Her breath caught as she identified shapes moving steadily toward the island, boats slicing through the water with quiet purpose, each carrying individuals who believed that power could still be wielded over her. Kyle's voice sharpened, the calm of the morning replaced by a cold, decisive authority that seemed to permeate the very walls. "They stop here," he said, voice low, almost a growl, and every team member froze for a heartbeat before obeying with instantaneous precision. Instructions flowed in clipped, urgent bursts over radios and earpieces, the security team repositioning, checkpoints activated, barriers raised, automated systems humming to life. Reino watched every movement, every adjustment, the efficiency of it both frightening and awe-inspiring. She could feel the magnitude of his empire, the depth of his preparation, and for the first time, she realized she was not merely being protected. She was being empowered to witness, to claim, and to rule over her own safety. The approaching boats grew larger on the screens, each bow slicing through the water like a blade, cutting into what they presumed to be their dominion. Reno's pulse raced, but she did not retreat. Instead, a steel-like clarity filled her veins. Fear was present, yes, but beneath it, a pulse of sovereignty surged. Years of being underestimated, of being dismissed, of being belittled by Darryl and those who thought she was powerless, coalesced into an unshakable force inside her. Every inch of her body vibrated with a quiet command. This island, this life, this future was hers to defend. Kyle's hands found hers once more, anchoring her against the storm of adrenaline threatening to scatter her thoughts. "No one touches you without going through me," he said, voice resonant, "and anyone attempting to bypass the island's defenses will answer to every safeguard we have in place, and to you." His words, spoken in a cadence of authority, imbued Reno with a fierce certainty. She drew in a breath, steadying herself against the weight of power, danger, and the exhilarating truth that she could now stand fully within her own force. The staff shifted subtly around her, their movements feeding off her resolve as much as Kyle's commands. She could feel the respect radiating from each one, the way the head of security tightened his jaw with focus, the subtle, almost imperceptible adjustment of the cameras, the alert positions of guards along corridors and cliffs. Every element of the mansion's defense bent to her presence, acknowledging her as sovereign, the axis around which this fortress rotated. Each screen, each radar blip, each radar-controlled turret became extensions of her authority, signaling that she had grown beyond the reach of any past tormentor. The boats drew closer, their intent clear. Intrusion, confrontation, perhaps intimidation. Rieno's eyes narrowed as she tracked their progress, the sunlight glinting off their hulls like tiny arrows of threat across the water. Her mind raced with possibilities, each scenario a potential challenge to her courage, each movement a test of her resolve. And yet, as she observed the calm efficiency of the mansion's response, she understood she was not powerless. She was watching from a position of unparalleled strength. Every command issued by Kyle, every defensive position assumed by the guards, was a reminder that she was no longer a victim waiting for rescue. She was a force embedded within a fortress that had been built for her rise. As the boats reached the outer boundary of the island, armed security teams activated remotely controlled barriers, intercepting their path without hesitation. Radios crackled with terse warnings and instructions. Reno Montclair does not receive uninvited guests. The declaration carried through the waves like a thunderclap, audible even in the faint hum of distant engines, and Reno felt a thrill run through her, a pulse of victory mingled with anticipation. This was the first true test of the woman she had become, the moment where theory met action, where strength was measured not by survival but by absolute command. Kale's gaze met hers, and in that look, Reno saw the acknowledgement of her transformation. He did not need to speak. She could feel the pride, the belief, and the promise that he would not only protect her, but allow her to stand in her own sovereignty. The approaching boats slowed, hesitation rippling through their crew as they registered the presence of armed defenses, cameras, and the silent yet unmistakable authority emanating from the woman on the screens. Reno's chest swelled with a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. The thrill of confrontation tempered by the certainty of victory that only comes when one stands fully in power. The ocean below rumbled softly, waves lapping against the cliffs in a rhythm that seemed to echo her heartbeat. Each swell of water mirrored the tension of the moment, the silent question hanging in the air: who dares challenge a woman who no longer fears? Reno's fingers tightened slightly on the railing of the security suite, her knuckles whitening as she drew strength from the reality around her. Every tactical movement, every digital readout, every shifting shadow of approaching boats reinforced the undeniable truth. She had risen, fully, absolutely, and anyone attempting to reach her would meet resistance calibrated by the full force of her resolve. Kyle's hand rested lightly on her back, grounding her as the final checks were made, as the boats hesitated at the edge of the protective boundary, and as the staff prepared to enforce their sovereign's will. Reno exhaled slowly, the tension draining yet leaving behind a fierce, luminous clarity. The powerless woman who had once been humiliated, mocked and discarded had been replaced by a force of authority, grace and unstoppable will. Her eyes never left the approaching threat, but fear no longer dictated her movements. Anticipation, strategy, and confidence had taken its place. The world had underestimated her, but here, at the edge of her reclaimed empire, she was not simply ready, she was unbreakable. And as the radio echoed one final warning to the intruders, Reno allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. The message was clear, not just to those on the boats, but to every person who had ever doubted her power, her resolve, or her worth. She was no longer a woman to be manipulated or contained. She was a force, sovereign and untouchable, and the rise they had once assumed impossible had arrived with absolute, undeniable clarity. The report from the guard reverberated through the halls of the mansion, a sharp, urgent sound that sliced through the serene air Reno had only just begun to breathe in. Her pulse quickened for a heartbeat, not with fear, but with anticipation, as though the challenge itself had been waiting to test the full measure of her rise. Kyle's hand remained lightly on her back, grounding her, a constant reminder that she was no longer alone in this world that had once sought to diminish her. He did not speak immediately, letting her process, letting the fire inside her begin to burn hotter, letting her step fully into the force she had become. Reno adjusted her posture instinctively, the movement subtle yet commanding, and she began to walk through the mansion, not as a guest, not as a visitor, but as a queen surveying a kingdom that had been prepared for her arrival, waiting for her rightful claim. Every hallway, every polished floor, every crystal fixture seemed to respond to her presence, bending toward her authority in ways she had never before experienced. The staff, trained meticulously to anticipate her movements, fell into a quiet rhythm behind her, admiration radiating in unspoken gestures. The tilt of a head, the soft click of heels against marble, the precise alignment of security monitors. Her eyes scanned the interior with measured focus, cataloguing the changes that signaled her empowerment. Rooms once designed for luxury alone now seemed to pulse with the unspoken understanding that they existed to honor her. Kyle stayed close, silent and watchful, his hand occasionally brushing hers in reassurance, in acknowledgement of the transformation he had waited years to witness his eyes. Deep pools of both tenderness and pride tracked every small movement she made, every subtle shift in her posture, every glance that conveyed authority rather than uncertainty. As they approached the command balcony overlooking the cliffs and the vast ocean, Reno stepped forward without hesitation. The wind whipped gently around her, tugging at the hem of her dress, lifting strands of her hair in a halo around her face. She raised her chin, feeling the sun catch on her skin, and she addressed the head of security with a voice that resonated like tempered steel, calm yet undeniably commanding. "Block Darrell and anyone he sends. Not because of fear, but because this is my territory, my life, and no one enters uninvited," she instructed, each word carefully measured, leaving no room for negotiation. Kyle watched her, his pride carved into the softness of his gaze, marveling silently at the woman who had once trembled under the weight of humiliation, but now commanded every corner of the island with quiet authority. The staff around them straightened instinctively, feeding off her strength, the subtle acknowledgement of her sovereignty visible in every precise movement they made. Each officer, each assistant, each attendant seemed to recognize that she was no longer the woman who needed to be shielded. She was the woman who defined the parameters of protection itself. They moved together along the cliffside path later that afternoon, the sun casting long shadows over the jagged rocks, the ocean roaring beneath them like a witness to their resolve. Cale's arm brushed hers occasionally, gentle yet possessive, a reminder that their connection was not just built on desire, but on the trust and understanding of shared power. He revealed, in hushed tones, the depth of the transformation she had undergone. Legally, financially, and strategically, she now held more influence than Darryl could ever threaten. Properties, shares, ownership, documents, all had been transferred into her name quietly, deliberately, each one a tangible representation of her sovereignty, a testament to Cale's faith in her vision and her strength. Reno's breath hitched as the weight of it sank in. She was not merely protected, she was constructed into a fortress of power, with intention, with love, and with vision. Her fingers reached out instinctively to touch Cale's face, tracing the sharp lines softened by affection, and she asked quietly, reverently, "Why do you believe in me so completely?" His gaze softened further, settling on her with a depth that shook her from the inside out. "Because you never needed saving, Reno," he said, voice low, vibrating with certainty. "You only needed a world big enough for your greatness." The word struck her like a drumbeat, resonating deep in her chest, unlocking a tenderness that had long been buried beneath layers of betrayal, humiliation, and survival. She felt it blossom, fierce and uncontainable, as Cale stepped closer, the heat of his presence drawing her into the orbit of something dangerous yet undeniable. Their lips hovered a breath apart, a promise, a question, an anticipation that hummed in the space between them, and then the interruption came. A sharp, hurried knock followed by the guard's urgent voice slicing through the charged air. "Darryl is trying something else!" The words jolted her fully awake, shattering the fragile moment, and sent a ripple of adrenaline rushing through every nerve. Her heart raced again, not with fear, but with a readiness that only comes from a woman fully in command, fully aware of the magnitude of the challenges that had once sought to diminish her. Cale's hand tightened around hers, grounding her while simultaneously transmitting the shared understanding that action must be immediate. Reno pivoted toward the security team with practiced authority, the surge of command coursing through her veins, her mind already calculating contingencies, strategies, and outcomes. Every display, every screen, every live feed became extensions of her presence as she absorbed the full scope of Darryl's potential move. She felt alive in a way she never had before, not merely surviving, but orchestrating, leading, and rising to meet the challenge with a poised, unshakable force. The mansion hummed with heightened energy as Reno issued instructions, her voice calm yet resonant, layering reassurance for the staff with an unmistakable warning to the world beyond the gates. No threat would breach her domain, no manipulation would sway her, and no past humiliation could ever reach her again. The guard repeated Darryl's latest maneuver, attempts at media manipulation, sending emissaries to approach the island, even considering legal claims designed to unsettle her newfound authority. Yet Reno's gaze remained unwavering, her mind sharp, her presence magnetic and commanding. Each movement of the security staff, each adjustment to defenses, each tactical command mirrored her newfound sovereignty. She realized with profound clarity that she no longer moved through the world as a shadow of someone else's desires. She existed fully, visibly, undeniably, and anyone who underestimated her would face consequences precisely calculated by her intelligence, intuition, and the empire surrounding her. Kyle's eyes never left her, observing the transformation with awe tempered by devotion. He had known her potential, had believed in it before even she could see it, but now watching her embody it fully, the woman who had been belittled and betrayed, standing resilient, commanding, radiant with authority and grace, he felt the culmination of years of waiting and silent vigilance. His hand brushed hers again, a gentle affirmation that this was her rise, her moment, and that he would always be there to witness and support her sovereign ascent. Reno's breath was steady, her posture impeccable, her commands crisp and decisive. The ocean roared beneath the cliffs, the wind whipped through the balcony, and the island itself seemed to pulse with her presence. Daryl's attempts, his manipulations, his lies, all of it collided with the indomitable force she had become. And every screen, every guard, every calculated move served as proof. She was untouchable, a woman fully risen into power that no one could diminish. The moment stretched, taut with anticipation. The incoming threats slowed as the full extent of her defenses became evident. Boats halted at the boundary, media attempts stalled as her statement and presence broadcast authority, and the island hummed with organized power. Reno allowed herself a fleeting, almost imperceptible smile, tasting the triumph that was no longer abstract but tangible. She had risen fully, decisively, and nothing, no man, no lie, no fear could stop her now. Her eyes returned to Kyle, who smiled softly back, pride etched into every line of his expression, a silent acknowledgement that the woman before him was the one he had always known she could be. And in that glance, Reno understood fully. This was no longer survival, no longer escape, no longer waiting for someone else to act. She was absolute, sovereign and unstoppable. The rise no one could ever stop. The woman the world had never been prepared to see. The guard's words echoed sharply through the mansion, cutting through the soft hum of the island like a lightning strike. Daryl was escalating. Reno's eyes narrowed, her chest swelling with a mixture of anticipation and a calm clarity she had never known before. The moment demanded precision, demanded courage, demanded a woman who had risen fully into her power. Kale's hand brushed hers instinctively, offering silent support, but she did not need protection. Not now, not ever. She had become the storm, the force, the sovereignty no lie or manipulation could touch. The mansion responded to her presence as if it recognized its rightful queen. Every polished surface reflected the intensity in her eyes. Every crystal fixture seemed to glimmer in alignment with the purpose she carried within her. Daryl, in the distant corridors of influence, was unaware that his attempts at public manipulation were about to collide with a force far greater than his desperation. He sought sympathy, to appear wronged, to gain back the narrative he thought he could control. But Reno had rewritten the rules, and the world was about to see a woman who no longer needed the validation or mercy of those who had tried to diminish her. Her fingers flexed slightly, brushing Kale's hand, a quiet signal of readiness. Her lips curved in a subtle, determined line, not a smile of joy, but a mark of calculated resolve. Together, Reno and Kale moved toward the media room, a space lined with screens glowing softly, each one reflecting live news feeds, social media reactions, and the ripple effects of Daryl's early attempts to spin the story. The room hummed with quiet tension, the staff moving efficiently around her as she passed, eyes lowering in respect, their deference tangible. Reno's gaze swept the room, cataloguing the technology, the cameras, the screens, the angles from which her presence would soon command the world's attention. Each step was deliberate, each movement a preparation for the declaration that would shift her existence from whispered humiliation to undeniable power. Kyle hesitated slightly, a flicker of concern crossing his face as though he feared the weight of the moment. But Reno's hand rested lightly on his arm, grounding him in the present. "I will decide how my story is told," she said, voice steady, smooth, resonating with authority. There was no hesitation, no tremor, only the quiet certainty of a woman who had lived in the shadow of betrayal and emerged as the light itself. Cale's expression softened, pride and awe reflected in the way he watched her prepare to step fully into the world, a force uncontainable, unstoppable, radiant with sovereignty. The cameras focused, live feeds flickered, and the audience beyond the walls of the mansion was unaware of the magnitude of the moment unfolding on the private island. Reno stood poised in a white silk dress that caught the sunlight streaming through the windows, the fabric flowing gently around her, each fold a testament to elegance, strength, and rebirth. Her eyes, steady and unflinching, mirrored the depth of a woman who had endured humiliation, betrayal, and the silent scorn of those who believed they could define her. The ocean behind her roared gently, the waves crashing against the cliffs like applause, tuned perfectly to her emergence. She began to speak, her voice calm but carrying the gravity of absolute truth. She spoke of betrayal and humiliation, of the lies that had been spun to diminish her, to cage her in shame. But she did not falter, did not tremble, did not cry out for justice. She claimed it through the clarity of her presence, through the undeniable authority of her words. Each sentence dismantled Daryl's narrative. Each pause was a punctuation mark of power, and each breath carried the weight of sovereignty that no lie could match. The world watched, stunned. Social media exploded in real time, comments flooding in, hashtags trending within seconds, news channels replaying her words as clips of undeniable dignity and control. Daryl's carefully constructed story crumbled under the weight of Reno's composure, elegance, and strength. He was no longer the man with power over her. He was the man exposed, small, irrelevant, fading as the reality of her rise overtook his attempts at influence. Cale remained close, his eyes never leaving hers, awestruck by the woman she had become. The Reno, who had trembled in despair, who had whispered to him in the dark of the night, was gone. In her place stood a force of nature, commanding, radiant, unassailable, and entirely sovereign. He saw it not just in her words, but in her posture. The subtle tilts of her head, the quiet confidence in the set of her shoulders, the way her hands moved to emphasize her truth. Each gesture, each glance, each inflection was a claim of territory, a declaration that the past had no dominion over her present or future. As she continued, Reno outlined the path she had chosen. Not revenge, not malice, but the deliberate construction of a life of autonomy, respect, and power. She spoke of survival transformed into sovereignty, of humiliation rewritten into authority, and of betrayal transformed into a launchpad for her unprecedented rise. Her voice carried across continents through the live feeds, touching lives, inspiring admiration, and igniting conversations about dignity, resilience, and empowerment. Daryl's efforts to spin her story collapsed visibly in real time, news networks retracting statements, social media users rallying behind her, and his career unraveling under the sheer brilliance of her composed counter-narrative. The public watched, mesmerized as she stood against the backdrop of the ocean and the sun, a figure sculpted by strength and tempered by experience, utterly untouchable, commanding the gaze of millions with a poise that was impossible to ignore. When her statement concluded, silence hung briefly, charged with the magnitude of what had just occurred. Then the digital world erupted. Messages of support, admiration, astonishment, and awe cascaded across the globe, evidence of the unstoppable force she had become. Kyle stepped closer, his hands gently holding hers, his lips brushing the side of her face in a gesture of reverence rather than rescue. She had not been saved. She had chosen her future, claimed it, and conquered it with every ounce of strength, intelligence, and grace she possessed. Reno turned to Kale, the corners of her eyes glinting with triumph and quiet relief, and let herself be enveloped in his embrace. The waves behind them crashed against the cliffs, a symphony that mirrored the thunderous applause of a world finally witnessing the woman who could not be silenced, the force that had emerged from the ashes of betrayal. Kale's voice was a low whisper, warm and steady, reverberating against her hair. "You didn't just rise, Reno. You conquered." Her lips curved into a satisfied, serene smile, the weight of her past replaced by the power of her present. The mansion, the island, the ocean, they all seemed to bow to her triumph, bearing witness to the reality that she had rewritten the narrative, reclaimed her dignity, and redefined the world's understanding of strength, beauty, and sovereignty. Reno Montclair had become more than a survivor. She had become an unstoppable force, and the world, for the first time, could not look away. Thank you for watching this incredible journey on Beyond Color Stories, a story of power, resilience, and love that refuses to be silenced. Remember, no matter the obstacles, your strength can rise above anything, just like Reno did. If her story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe for more unforgettable tales, and comment below. Tell us which moment gave you chills. Stay with us, because the next story will take you even deeper into a world where courage, passion, and destiny collide.